Episode recap, Lone Australia number 4. Gina, starting off, pretty emotional story, and I was tearing up watching it. I was tearing up the first time she told me about it on boot camp. She obviously draws a lot of strength, having been through hell and come back again. Nothing's ever going to be as bad as that. And I mean, that's a coping mechanism I use for stuff, but I've got nothing that bad to compare it to. Having kids myself, I honestly can't even imagine how bad that would be. So yeah, it's a very interesting part of her story. And I think, someone that can survive that mentally is going to be tough mentally, which she obviously is. All right, so we saw Michael for the first time, saw his spot. And I got to say, I think he's got a bit of a rubbish spot. It's just purely luck. It's drawn out of a hat. But there's no grass, and it looks hilly and very thick. And it looks like it sucks, really. We can move our stuff, but it's 70 kilos of gear, a lot of energy to move that kind of stuff. So generally you wouldn't want to try and move it too far. And I don't know what his options were like left and right. He's got a tough spot. Kate looked like she's got a tough spot. Same with Duane. He's got some different plants. So that's just my guess from what I can see. But all three of those guys don't have any grass that I can see. On those establishing drone shots, when the drone comes in and their names appear on the screen, it just looks like no grass. So grass is like a survival currency of the bush when it comes to animals, how many animals are available. Because what do paddymellons, what do wallabies, wombats eat? They eat grass. So if you're trying to farm cows and you have a paddock that has no grass in it, you can't stock any cows in there, can you? So native animals are the same. Now, there used to be lots of grass in the bush because Aboriginal people used to manage it very carefully with traditional burning. So there was a hell of a lot more native animals in Australia when Aboriginal people managed the landscape. We don't manage it the same way because, one, we don't even recognise that it used to be different in the guiding principles of our land management agencies, even though Captain Cook, early explorers, Charles Darwin, the artists all drew it, having a lot of grass underneath, not much undergrowth, less density of trees. The evidence is all completely there, and of course Aboriginal people tell us that as well, but we don't recognise it, and therefore we don't manage it that way, so therefore there's a hell of a lot less native plants in the bush. And it also affects the biodiversity and range of plants as well, because traditional burning used to optimise it for the plants as well. So, because there's no grass in the bush, the only decent places to get grass in this place are where the lake recedes, and then you've basically got the water coming in and coming out. So slower growing plants like undergrowth and larger trees die in that area, but the grass comes back quickly. The reason they don't have grass is because I'd say their bank is too steep, so there's not enough. It's too steep for the decent soil that the grass grows on to stay there, and also they're probably exposed to the westerly winds. So when you get those strong winds, 100 k's an hour, it creates chop, even though it's just a lake. If you're on a slightly wider section, and particularly if it faces west, those waves are going to wash on the shore, and it washes it all the way back to the bedrock, or through the topsoil layer that was once there before the lake came in, and basically it's just almost like a dead zone. The only times you get grass is when you've got a shallow enough bank for the soil to stay there, and a sheltered enough bank that the wave action doesn't eat away at it. So I'm lucky in that I've got maybe a tennis court or 2 tennis court size patch of grass out the front of mine. Chris looks like on his establishing drone shot, he's got a green patch on a creek and another green patch on a creek. Nice to have the little creeks coming in too. That's a good bonus, although they may not be big enough to have spawning trout, but I'm not sure. I haven't really seen I haven't walked around his creek, so I don't know. And Gina, I think Gina's won the lottery as far as the amount of grass that she's got around her area. And that's just purely luck of the draw. And there's a shallow gradient, and I'm guessing there is some protection, not a lot of fetch length from the wind and the waves eating away at that. So that's a big factor when it comes to how many animals that our areas are going to support. Differences in fishing and stuff, it's not really related to that, but that's quite a significant point when it comes to bush and how many animals they're going to be. All right, so Michael doing a good recce around there, and finding it hard to get back again. That's not surprising because there's a couple of reasons. One, you notice how it was cloudy. So you don't have the natural orientation that many of us have with the sun, because the sun's doing quite a high northern arc in the sky because it's winter time and we're down at 45 degrees south, so 45 plus 23 is about 68 degrees. The sun is literally only 30 degrees above the horizon. So if you put your hands out like that, which is 15 degrees, the sun's doing an arc midwinter really low on the horizon. So it's good for orientation. So it's hard to keep your bearings naturally if it's cloudy. And he had a compass, but you can see when he's crawling through the bush like that, it's very hard to take a compass bearing because you can only go maybe a car length or two in front, and you've got to go around things to get there. So it is hard to maintain orientation. Plus, he looked like he had a lot of undulations as well. So you might think that, you know, the land slopes off that way, but you just don't have a nice consistent ridgeline. It didn't look like he had a nice consistent ridgeline to follow. So they're all factors, but also good on him for getting out and trying to scope around his area, because that's an important thing to do. Cool. Chris, yeah, gill net's coming along. He's using the inner cord of the paracord there, and he's getting through it. It's frustrating though. So it's incredibly frustrating. When you tie those knots, they get stuck, they get caught on little cuts in your fingers and little, if there's something sticking up on your fingernail, any bits of dirt and leaves grab onto it. It is a very frustrating job making those gill nets out of such fine material. If you have unlimited material and you can use thicker fibres, it's not quite so bad, but that paracord fibre is really frustrating. So I thought it was, I loved his comment when he's just like, F you, GoPro. Yeah, certainly, I think we've probably all said that. Yeah, it's frustrating doing that filming and just everything, you're trying to wind string, it gets frustrating. I certainly felt the same way plenty of times in my experience. Yeah, he's still cracking out the fishing. You can see, it's not a matter of throwing a line in and catching a fish there. It's a tricky place to catch fish. Surprising, really, really surprising that it is so tricky to catch fish. Even the eels don't really seem that keen to bite either. Right, Duane. So he's doing a good job on his shelter. The one thing about the Australian bush is you don't get lots of long, straight poles like you get in North America. You get pine trees and they're almost dead straight. You just whittle off the outgoing branches and you've got these beautiful straight poles. You can get those in Australian species, but it's much harder to find stands of very straight poles. So he got some reasonable stuff, but you're never going to get them stacking really neatly next to each other. So you're going to have much bigger problem with gaps and things like that. So, and often you've got to walk a long way to get your pole. Like he was complaining about that the same way. It's one of the reasons you don't want to have to do too much shelter building of that nature, just because it's so difficult to gather materials, because sometimes you might have to go 300 metres to find a straight pole and then another 300 metres to find another straight pole. It's not like you're just right next to your camp just harvesting all the nice straight stuff. I love how he's got a sandy floor. It doesn't look like sand, it looks like quartz grain. So I reckon the bedrock there is probably granite, and it's broken down through saprolite into just these, looks like water washed granite. His beach is made of the same stuff. And so it looks to me like he's actually heaped it in there on the floor, which is perfect, because in the area, you know, like that most of us are in, it was quite muddy. So it's a real struggle. You know, I was constantly having to put branches down, bracken, ferns and whatever, just because you're sloshing through mud, and it's not very nice living in a place where you drop something and it's in the mud and it's all wet. So nice going there. And yeah, his shelter's coming along nicely. Now, another time I teared up watching that episode is listening to him talk about his extended family's backstory, you know, with his grandmother. So that is just pretty much every Aboriginal person I've spoken to, not every, because they don't all open up and give you their life story straight away, but when the elders that I've got to know, they all have similar stories. They're horrendous. Massacres of, 500 people. Like I was chatting to an elder last year up in Cape York, and 500 of her clan of 800 were massacred in one hit. And the remaining people have these horrible stories, like Duane was talking about, his grandmother's brother, the brother thrown down a well, sent off to institutions. It's terrible. That's a very, very common story. And it's good that Duane's getting it out there, because I don't think, well, I never used to appreciate how common that is. And now I'm wondering if there's any Aboriginal people that don't have a story like that. And his figures of 3 out of 50, so that's 6%. And it was only a 6% survival rate. Yeah, crazy. So good on you, Duane, for getting that out there. Kate, yeah, some funny one-liners from Kate. Really, really funny. I've got to mention, Kate's got a YouTube channel, Kate Growrock, and she makes some really great hiking videos, YouTube stuff. And she's, being an ecologist, biologist, my sister actually used to work with her as well. She's got a fair bit of information there of that scientific nature, which you can get from her videos, and she's a real bush tucker aficionado as well. So I'll put a link to that in the description. And Chris, also Tassie Adventure Man, I'll put a link to his in the description as well. He's going out doing a lot of seafood stuff, getting lobsters and abalone and sea urchins and stuff like that. So check out his stuff as well. What else was Kate doing? Her shelter's looking like it's coming along nicely. Yeah, so Kate obviously has a different view on animals. So she's not vegetarian, as far as I understand, but she's just not keen to be choosing to go for wildlife. So once again, really interesting to see everyone's different points of view. We all have different kind of ethical feelings about what's right, what's wrong, what's good, what's bad. And the show brings that out and forces you to think about it. It's forced me to think on my stance about whether it's appropriate to eat native animals or not. I'll probably talk about that in another video, but there's a lot of things that I've really gone and dug into, and okay, is my opinion really valid when I research it? You just come up with new information. Right, who am I missing? Kate, Duane, Gina, Chris. Yeah, there's only 6 of us now. I keep thinking I'm missing someone out. I guess I haven't spoken about me. Right, so day 3, we're in there, and obviously this episode spanned 3 days. So more things are happening, which is cool. So I was making my kayak, and then I saw a paddy melon and my trail cam. Now there's a couple of different spots there. I actually scoped out an initial spot where I first saw that paddy melon, which you saw, and then I realised that it wasn't a very suitable place for a trap, and I found a better trail. Like, I call that like a side street that first paddy melon I saw was on. And I wanted to find the main arteries, you know, the highways, the M7. And so I kind of found where like the M5 and the M7 came together in a fork there. That's where I put these are big highways in Sydney, by the way. So that's where I put the trail cam looking down, so I'd see animals coming in from both sides. And then I put it plonked right in the middle of the main arterial highway, which is on the top of a ridgeline, which is where you generally expect to see the most traffic, because animals are like us. They just want to choose the least path of resistance. So in fact, you even heard me talking about, like, if I was an animal, where would I go? Because that's, when you track a human through the bush, that's how you do it. Where would I walk? Well, I wouldn't go that way because I'd have to crawl under that log. So a lot of tracking is, which way would I go? Now, if you're tracking a smaller animal, obviously they don't care so much about, you know, they might only need that much headroom, but you can think through in your mind, if I was a small animal, where would I be going? I'd be trying to get to that, you know, patch of grass over there. Okay, well, which way would I go? You know, maybe, anyway, that's the kind of psychology that you're going through when you're picking a place. And then once you've figured that out, you can look on the ground and see like a game trail effectively. And you can see, particularly when there's like a log on the ground, they'll generally jump on the log and then jump off. And you can see how worn that is. That would be a perfect kind of place that you would put a snare, for example, but we're not allowed to use snares. So it makes it so much harder. So I dropped the kayak, and just because my biggest priority is food, I said that from the beginning, I've got this big lump of meat bouncing around at night time within a few hundred metres of my camp. So that's the highest priority. And that's why I've switched straight onto that, what was I about to say there? Yeah, you don't know how long an animal's going to stay in the area. So it's tempting to go, well, I'll just finish my kayak, and then, you know, maybe on about, 3 weeks time, when I get around to it, then I'll go and trap that animal. That often, when I've been to a place, there'll be an animal there to begin with, or for a short period of time, and then they're gone. So you've got to, I think, capitalise if you see an animal and just target it straight away in my case. So I just reprioritise everything to that. Now, it looked like I just made that net in an afternoon and chucked up a trap. It wasn't like that. I had to work, I'm guessing, can't really remember, maybe 3 solid full-time days. So when I say days, I allowed myself 8 hours a night to sleep, and the rest of the time I was working. So, okay, I'm going to finish this off at home because when I started editing, I realised that the autofocus had just dropped out completely. So I'm back at home. So just to finish up here. So I was talking about my work rate. So I'd give myself 8 hours a night to sleep, and then the rest of the time, that other 16 hours of the day, I would just work solid, just with small breaks every sort of 40 to 50 minutes. So it took me days to build the net and then up the hill and made the trap basically by putting some very heavy logs. They're stringy bark logs. They're so heavy that they actually sink in water. They're so dense. It took a lot of effort to set, and I just had a very thin bank line running across as a tripwire there. And it looked to me like the paddy melon was pretty much standing in the net, just sniffing around at the trigger mechanism, and it could probably smell me, and it could also just the disturbed leaf matter really on the ground there. Right, so unfortunately it didn't set it off. Cool. I also made a fishing rod, and that was because I was concerned that if I saw a fish swimming along, I didn't want to be naked and with no way of casting to a fish. So I can't remember how long that took me, but there was probably some nights I spent probably half a day putting that rod together, but I'd practiced how I was going to make that before I went out there. And probably the last thing to talk about is COVID. So I'm now coming out of having COVID. Sort of day 5 or 6 was when I started to feel a little bit better. And one of the things I noticed was it actually really affected my memory. Like I kept forgetting to turn the camera on like multiple times. So I must have been forgetting other stuff as well. But anyway, I managed to slowly climb out of that and start feeling a lot better. To me, I look a lot better. Like my eyes don't look droopy. I don't sound as bad and things. So that's nice to have that over with. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you again on Recap 5.